Welcome back to Shift and Fix Garage. My name is Luis, and today I'm going to explain why I decided to un-LS swap my 72 Trans Am, basically when I was at the finish line, and what new direction I'm going to be taking with the car instead. And when I say that I basically had this car at the finish line, I mean I literally had this car at the finish line. The engine was completely built by me. I had swapped over the components of the T56 so it can accept the LS engine. I shorted the drive shaft. I did the complete electrical system on the car. I did the fuel system on the car. I drove the car as is and it was great. And the first thing I did was obviously a burnout. And some quick details about the engine. It was a 408 cubic inch LS. It started out as a Gen 3 6-liter truck engine, but with the 408 stroker kit. The crankshaft was a forged scat 4-inch stroke crankshaft with forged connecting rods, and then I had forged pistons. I had 243 heads on there, camshaft. It had headers. It had a new intake. Had several new intakes. It also had a T56 6-speed manual transmission. And this is where I'm going to explain the total history of the car. And that way you kind of understand the decision that I made, which was to un-LS swap it. So I got this car basically around New Year's of 2021 after a friend had sent it to me on OfferUp. And so I literally went on my lunch break, went and go check out this car that was somewhat nearby to where I was working. Sure enough, I saw the car and there was a bunch of issues that I should have noticed, but you know, this is my dream car, like the 1970 to 1973 Trans Am.
All right, so let's go over this car and let's have a look at the negatives and the positives of what I just bought. So one of the positives is that it kind of came with some new tires and some new rims. Kick for good measure. A negative that you notice right away is it's missing the back glass and the front glass is cracked. The interior has been stripped out and it has no dash. And the passenger side front fender has some weird bodywork on it. It also doesn't have the trunk lid. It doesn't have an engine or transmission either. And that's kind of good because I would have to take it out. And I'm gonna do an LS swap on this one, so it doesn't really matter.
And to give you some extra context, my dad had passed away in June of 2020 from COVID, and he absolutely loved these cars. I immediately thought about what my dad always wanted to do to a car. I mean, he was a mechanic and he'd work on literally everything except his own stuff. And so he has a 1984 Trans Am that he's been trying to do an LS swap since like 2013. He just never got to dedicate his time to finishing the swap, and he was basically hoarding a whole bunch of parts. And so the main thing on my mind when I bought this car was, you know what, I'm gonna complete my dad's wishes of LS swapping a car. So in 2021, I started a TikTok account, and then I made a whole bunch of videos on me going through the engine and learning how to build an LS, and realizing that I don't know as much as I thought I knew. Because I would always help on my dad in the garage and always help him on the jobs he had. But only until I was left alone is when I realized that I'm missing a lot of the critical knowledge that you need to, build an engine. So now I fast forward and I basically have the car complete. I have electronic fuel ejection at this point, and this is where my first mistake comes into play. I purchased some Corvette, I think LS2 injectors off of eBay, authentic OEM injectors, because I didn't want to buy fake injectors and risk, blowing up my engine with fake injectors. But one of the injectors was dirty or had broke in some way. And so the very first time I started it, I didn't have the key on for that long. So the engine actually turned on and ran, and I was so excited. But then I felt like the engine wasn't running correctly. And I had assumed that it was the tune file that was keeping it from running correctly. So I turned off the engine, and as I was fumbling on the computer, you have to have the key on in order to be connected to the car's computer. The injector that was stuck wide open was literally filling the entire cylinder full of gasoline. So the next time that I tried to crank the car, I cranked it for like 1 revolution and then it completely stopped. The engine did not want to move anymore. And so I was like, That's weird. And when I removed the intake is when I saw on one of the intake ports was completely full of gasoline. And that's when I realized like something was bad. But once I got the engine out and then I inspected why the engine was no longer rotating, I discovered that I had bent one of the connecting rods and the piston for that cylinder was broken. At that point, I kind of got discouraged from posting on TikTok because I kind of felt like I was an idiot for trusting used injectors and for thinking that I basically knew what the hell I was doing. Fast forward, I order a replacement connecting rod and a replacement piston and rings, and I get the engine back together again. And this time the engine runs. Okay, I'm gonna turn on the car now. It's in neutral. Had a pretty bad lifter tick, and here's some video that kind of shows how bad it was. And obviously when you have lifter tick or some kind of lifter failure, the heads have to come off again, and that is always annoying. So I took the head off one more time, which included taking off the intake. I had to replace the non-reusable head bolts and the head gasket just to end up with a different problem after that. Okay, I'm cranking. It's not really wanting to start. I was using a Speedmaster intake, and because I didn't have the experience with diagnosing weird issues, I never realized that the intake manifold actually never sat flush and created a good seal with the heads. And after months of not wanting to deal with this kind of problem, I performed a smoke leak down test, and this is what happened. See nothing at the moment, but look, let me blow a little bit. The smoke is coming from the gaskets. So it's meaning that the intake manifold is not sitting correctly. After coming to the conclusion that it might be the intake manifold, I decided to swap in my dad's aluminum intake manifold and see if that could be the issue. My throttle cable, which is just an actual cable. Let's get it. I was obviously excited that I had finally got my car running, so I did some victory laps around the block, and obviously I had a whole bunch of fun. And I don't know if you heard that, but the lifter tick was back again, unfortunately. That kind of deflated the sales a little bit, so that's why I ended up picking up a different car that was kind of the opposite of what this car was, and it was a 73 Omega, where it was carbureted, had an old engine, and it was actually kind of fun to drive and to work on. And seeing that I was having such an easier time with this older car that should have been harder to work on, it gave me an idea for the Trans Am. I pulled out the engine again for the 1,000,000th time to fix that second lifter tick that I've had. And that's when I decided I was going to have this car carbureted. I basically removed the entire EFI electrical system, which was from Painless, I believe. But then here's my final mistake with this engine, is when I finally turned on the engine with the carburetor, man, it ran beautifully. But one thing I forgot to hook up was the oil pressure sensor. So the oil pressure sensor is in the back of the engine on the top. I turned on the car and it was running amazing, but I didn't realize at the exact same time it was spewing all of the engine oil out the back of the engine on top of the transmission. I had turned this car on for about a minute before I realized that there was a huge puddle of oil underneath the car, and I couldn't pinpoint where it was leaking from because it kind of seemed like it was leaking from the bottom of the engine. I turned on the car like 2 more times, and the last time is when I actually saw the oil shooting out. And at this point, I pretty much emptied out all of the oil from this car, revving it up to like 4,000 RPM without any oil. And that's when I realized I had messed up. I was kind of unmotivated to continue working on the car. So I kind of let it sit for a few months, and then I got different project cars. I had a 73 Oldsmobile Omega, and then now I have my 2000 Trans Am. And the transmission was bad on that car, and I had a working T56 on this car. So that's when I robbed the transmission out of this one to put into the other car. And once the transmission was out, I was kind of like, well, what's the point? Let me just pull the engine out. And with the engine out of the car is when I had the chance to think about what direction I wanted to take with it. On one hand, I wanted to honor my dad because he always wanted to do an LS swap and he never got a chance to. And on the other hand, my dad had always described driving these cars when he was younger, before he had me. I never got to see him have one. I only have his stories to go off of. And he would describe, you know, the shaker rumbling, the sound of the Pontiac engine, the way the torque felt from the car, the way he would do donuts on the street. I kind of felt like the LS engine will not allow me to feel what my dad was talking about. I kind of put a band-aid on it by doing a carburetor conversion on the LS engine. So it was kind of like the best of both worlds. It was like the modern engine, but it had the carburetor. So ultimately I felt like I was still not going to achieve that old school feeling that I wanted to achieve. So this is when I saw the listing for the Pontiac 455 engine that I have now. And I was like, oh my God, I can actually get a Pontiac 455 engine and have it in my car and be able to feel the engine the way that my dad felt it back then when he was driving one. So at that point, that's when I decided, you know what, I'm not going to continue with the LS swap anymore. And I don't really feel like I'm quitting the LS swap because it got too hard for me. I mean, I'm sure that the bearings inside the engine are wrecked, but literally I've dealt with a broken piston and connecting rod. So the actual work itself didn't really scare me this time around. I just kind of had a change of heart. And honestly, I'm not even done with that LS engine. My plans are to use that engine, fix it back up, and put it into my 2000 Trans Am. So that's basically why I decided to abandon the LS swap. And with everything that I learned from the LS engine, I feel like that's going to prepare me better to build out this Pontiac engine the best way that I can. And that's basically the entire story of this car and why I decided to un-LS swap it. You know, LS swaps are great. I'm sure they make a lot of power. My engine was a 408 stroker, but it will still never replace that old school feeling of an older engine. It just won't. I mean, yeah, it will make more power. It sounds amazing. The exhaust is great. But it would just never be the old stuff. I don't really care that the Pontiac 455 is going to make less horsepower or can't rev as high, simply because the engine itself is special. The memories that I associate with the engine is above any horsepower that I could be searching for. And lastly, I'll say thank you guys for watching, and I hope you'll stick around for this build because I'm going to be documenting the whole thing on YouTube for you guys to see.